Next, we're lucky to have Ben Biddulph here to talk to us about the nitrogen and density impacts on frost risk in wheat. Ben's got more than 15 years experience in ag research and industry development of cereals in Australia for DPIRD and UWA. Thanks, Ben.
While we get started, I know I'm the last speaker, so I've bought a few tools to try and keep you guys awake. I need some volunteers. Chloe, you're already one. You're the big tool. You get the hammer. Who else is there? We're going to kit up these guys at the back. They've been sitting up here. Yeah. Now, what are you, a big tool or a little tool, Smithy? Or mid-sized tool? Bigger one? And where did Ben go? He just ducked out. He was going to get picked on. Cool. So the title of my talk, a little bit of performance enhancement is okay. And we'll get through to that. So choosing a crop or a car is a bit like the same thing when it comes to frost-prone landscapes. Choosing your growing crop is like selecting which car to buy. That really depends on what sort of road and terrain you're going to do and how you actually get the most performance out of it, and that really is like how you actually manage that crop in season. So the road and terrain, positioning landscape and seasonal rainfall, that kind of depends on the enterprise you put in there, whether you're using grazing, hay crops, or whether you're actually into your full-blown cropping. The type of car you need, whether you want a four-wheel drive, an all-wheel drive or a two-wheel drive, that really depends on the distance travelled in the growing season. So whether you're sowing in April or whether you're sowing in May or end of June. And that really depends on the crop type and the maturity type that you actually need to use. The rims and tyres you put on a car, that kind of depends on the stubble management. And that's really around what are you doing to that stubble in terms of cutting low, windrow burning. That has an impact on frost risk. The performance enhancement of a car, so whether you've chipped it, tuned it to make sure you get the most performance out of that V8 turbo diesel engine you've got in there, and that really comes back to like your nutrition and seeding rate. So some of you have heard me talk about this analogy before in terms of wheat varieties. We've got the short season wheats, which are like the race cars of the car world. We've got the cutlass Yippee types, which are kind of the mid-season, and the winter wheats, which are more like the Land Cruisers. And then, in terms of the crop types, in terms of the cereals, we've got the oats, which are really dual purpose, so they're a bit like the dual cabs, and then barley is kind of our Range Rover Sports in terms of frost. But basically, beer is better than porridge and bread, generally, when we look at that analogy, but I'll go into that later if we have time. So what I really want to talk about today is the tools, hence why I handed some out. The big tool we've got for frost is happens now. So it becomes, in terms of your biggest tool, is actually making a conscious decision to manage your frost-prone zones differently, or your frost-prone parts of your landscape, in terms of what crop type you do and what enterprise you do, and the variety by time of sowing. So it's really about having a plan on how you're going to manage that. The little tools, like Andrew up the back there, is around stubble management, potash nutrition, grazing crops, soil amelioration. They're kind of the little things that can help tweak frost. But the tool we're going to discuss today is canopy management through seeding rate and nitrogen, and work out whether that's a big tool or a little tool. So for the guys who've got their tools in their hand, who thinks that they've got the right tool? Is canopy management a big tool, Chloe? No, she's not putting it up. Andrew, a medium-sized tool? Medium or small? So we'll see. We'll get to the end. So the rest of my talk really is about your frost-prone areas, and it's about consciously managing those differently. Some of you may not have this, so you don't have frost as a problem. Sorry, I'm shocking with microphones. Some of you, it might be a third of your program, and it might be landscape dominated. For other of you, it might be your whole farm, or it might be different farms. So really what I'm talking about is how you actually think about frost in your enterprise, and how you actually manage it. And it's those areas which you're actually going to consciously manage differently from a frost risk management point of view that I want you to think of for the rest of the talk. Bit of background on nitrogen and canopy management from before I started working on frost. So this is some work done by Garen Nell down at Borden in 2003 to 2005, where basically they set up a low, medium and a high yield potential target on a site which was basically on sites which had basically come out of good clover pastures, so not highly nitrogen responsive. And they basically set up a low yield potential of low seed rate, low input costs versus a medium of seed rates, medium input costs, and what they classified as high seed rate, high input costs for that time. And look, they just looked at the production economics over the 3 years when it got frosted. And basically what they found is essentially, this is the gross income of the crop, take the input costs, and essentially they found as their input costs increased, their gross income reduced. Essentially, particularly even in the years where and most of that was because they weren't getting a yield response to nitrogen. You can see even in 2003 and 2004 where the crop wasn't really frosted much, the yields went down where they put on more nitrogen. And then in the year of 2005, so that was the first year I'd actually seen frost damage on our family farm. You can see obviously there's a strong negative correlation. The more money they spent, the more money they lost, essentially at that year. And what what Melissa Rebeck and Garen Nell proposed was this kind of soil heat bank theory where if you grow a really thick canopy, you get less heat coming into the soil during the day, so less heat can re-radiate out at the night, and it makes the frost colder and more severe. So, past work has indicated there's greater financial risk with higher seed on unresponsive nitrogen adequate sites. There's also avidonal evidence, so every time I talk to farmers about it, they tell me, oh Ben, this paddock got more frosted because I put out more nitrogen on it. I get that probably every second talk I do. So the project really was trying to evaluate the role of seeding rate and nitrogen on frost severity and duration. So actually go and measure it properly. Look at canopy development, obviously, because as we push nitrogen and seeding rate, we increase the synchronisation of the canopy, so we get more of the crop flowering at the same time. Frost damage, obviously, and our hypothesis was that seed rates and nitrogen rates lower than grower practice could reduce frost severity, duration, damage, and basically make you more money when frosted. Obviously, we know there's an opportunity cost when you're not frosted. So these are the trials we ran in WA, and thanks to Chloe and Andrew who ran some of these with us in their previous jobs. So those are around Corrigan, Wickerpin, and then Coolin and Pingerup. We also had a few other trials over here, over the eastern seaboard as well. And these were large-scale trials. So what we know from our previous frost work is if we actually want to look at frost severity and duration, we actually need big plots. So these are 12 metres by 30 metres, and this is the trial site out at Corrigan. And these are basically where we looked at the standard grower practice rate of 30 units of N with a full seeding rate, essentially. So the full seed rate goes up here versus half seed rate, and the different nitrogen treatments. So the nitrogen treatments were basically roughly half of the grower farmer practice for nitrogen, the standard farmer practice for nitrogen, and double the farmer practice for nitrogen for his target crop for that production environment. And then we went out and looked at canopy temperature. So every plot had a tiny tag in it, set up at canopy boundary layer to look at the severity and duration changes of frost from these sensitive stages from Z31 all the way through to mid-grain fill to look at that temperature data. So what did we find from that? We did find that reducing seeding rates can reduce frost severity for that whole window from around ear peak through to mid-grain fill. So relative to the control, so this is the farmer control practice, reducing the seed rate to half reduced the severity of the frost throughout that whole window.
What are you calling severity?
So that's actually the sum of minimum temperatures. Yep, so it's the temperature. Yep, or a measure of the temperature. It's all log transformed because of the variation in frost severity at different sites. Obviously some sites have 60 frosts, some have 20 frosts, some have 5 frosts, and I'll go into that in a little bit. Relative to the control of full seed rate, with full seed rate and grower practice N, half of the grower nitrogen reduced frost severity. So if we put on less nitrogen up front than what the grower would normally have done, we got less frost severity throughout that window. And if we've doubled the nitrogen, we increase the frost severity compared to what the farmer would have done. So this is across all of those 13 trials in the data set. But how much is that? What does that actually mean? Well, let's look at this in another way. So this is basically anthesis biomass for all the different sites plotted against the duration in the hours below -1 for that window. So for every 1 tonne a hectare of biomass, it increased the duration of frost by around 30 minutes. So basically, if we look down this end, our low seed rates, low nitrogen treatments generally produced around 3 to 4 tonnes per hectare. Our high seed rate, high nitrogen treatments generally produced around 7 to 8 tonnes per hectare. So all the sites were nitrogen responsive, and across that range, as we increase the biomass, we increase the frost, statistically. So on average, we basically increased the biomass from around 4 tonnes up to 8 tonnes, which can increase the duration of the frost by 2 hours, 20 minutes for that whole period of development. So from Z49 to Z85. So from head emergence through to late grain fill.
So then saying that you're increasing the duration but not necessarily the impact?
Yeah, the reality is that's sweet bugger all, Julianne. Thanks. Compared to stubble retention, which is normally around, somewhere around 4 tonnes a hectare of stubble at seeding, throughout that same window, that increased the frost by 10 to 20 hours. So yes, we can dick around with nitrogen and seeding rate to try and reduce frost severity and duration, but we're much better off looking at how we're managing our stubble in our farming system than even bothering about looking at nitrogen and seed rate. So quickly to answer, sorry, Smithy, you're wrong. So stubble is a reasonable size tool. So I think what size are you? 24 mil? Canopy seed rate? 10 mil? I probably need a smaller spanner actually. Probably 5 or 6 mil would probably be more indicative. So let's actually go and have a look at some of the yield data and the gross income changes across this. So we've classified the sites as low to not frosted, and this is a busy table, so I will take a little bit to explain it. So these are the grain yield and gross margins in those sites with low to no frost. So these are the actual sites. So we've got Wickerpin 2018, 2017, Quarrigen 2017, Lubeck in Victoria in 2016, and Meckering in 2017. So that's the sites. That's when they flowered from the 5th of October to around 12th of September. These are the nitrogen responses, so N1 to N3. And what I've done here is I've shaded it. So basically, as we all know that as we put more nitrogen on, we increase biomass, we increase grain yield, we increase grain protein, and hopefully we increase gross income. And that's basically what I've done, is I've highlighted it where it's in green, where you've got a positive trend, which you would normally expect, and it's statistically different. So what you can see here, none of these sites really had much frost, so they all had less than 20% sterility in terms of florets sterility, and no difference between the treatments. The maturity biomass, they were all nitrogen responsive except for Lubeck. So Lubeck in 2016 was on a Luthen rotation, so high nitrogen site, as we would expect, no real increase in biomass with the nitrogen applied. Harvest indexes were really good, so around 35 to 40%. The grain yield significantly increased at 3 of the 4 sites. Grain protein increased at 2 of the 5 sites. And we got basically positive gross margins where essentially we'll be better off putting on more nitrogen as we'd expect. If we go and have a look at these moderately frosted sites, so these are the ones where there's somewhere around 20 to 50% loss of grain yield. We can see under this moderate frost, 20 to 60% loss in grain yield, increase in nitrogen, increased grain yield at 2 out of the 3 sites, and gross margins at 1, or had no effect. So the sites we've got here are Quarrigen in 2018, Condo in New South Wales in 2016 and 2017, so they're really low rainfall sites, very similar to Merredin in terms of our production environment. What we can see again, all good maturity biomass increases, so nitrogen responsive sites, reasonable harvest indexes, and grain yield went up marginally, and occasionally the gross margins also went up. So you weren't any worse off. That's the important thing. Grain margins, gross margins didn't actually go down. When we look at these really severely frosted sites, they're another bit of a similar story again. So these are Coolin in 2016, Bingerup in 2016, and Matoa in 2016 in Victoria. As most of you guys know, 2016 in WA was a good production year, even out at Bingerup and Coolin. So they had around 200 to 270 mils of growing season rainfall. They got good biomass responses to nitrogen, crappy harvest indexes because they're around 50 to 60% frosted, quite severely frosted. the grain yields ranged from around 1.5 to 1.8 tonnes per hectare, so we still did get a yield response to the nitrogen and a grain protein response to the nitrogen, but because the growers had basically fed those crops quite well that year, there wasn't a really good, strong, positive return to that change in gross income. So basically we got a bit of a variable response to nitrogen under severe frost. So yeah, sometimes you might get it paid back, sometimes you won't, and really that kind of depends on the frost. So in Coolin and Pingerup itself got really smashed with grain frost, and so nothing was actually deliverable. And most of these prices, the prices here are so low, even though they got 2 tonne per hectare, because it wasn't even deliverable as feed. Coolin got smashed harder with flowering frost, but basically wasn't able to compensate and make grain number because it had too low a grain number. And the site in Victoria basically got really badly grain frosted as well, and one of the treatments dropped out in terms of its response. So this basically these two treatments were deliverable and this one wasn't. So the key messages, so reducing nitrogen seeding rate to half of farmer practice can reduce frost severity and duration, but it doesn't really change the damage. And under nil and light frost, so 0 to 20% loss of grain yield, increasing inputs increases grain yield and gross margin as you'd expect. Under moderate frost, increasing nitrogen inputs increases grain yield and gross margin or had no effect. And under severe frost, it doesn't generally increase nitrogen inputs, can't increase grain yield enough to change the gross margin, but the most important part is that with moderate frost and severe frost, we're never worse off in terms of a gross margin response from the data set we've collected. So conclusions, a little bit of performance enhancement is okay. So if you want to go and chip your cruiser, definitely don't hold back, just don't chip it too much. That's kind of the caveat. In frost-prone landscapes, maintain robust seeding rates to maintain weed competition and yield potential, maintain your standard nitrogen input levels, and in years with higher yield potential, depending on your risk profile, you may get better return on investment on nitrogen in less frost-prone areas. So like years like 2016, where we had really good high potential, we were limited on nitrogen because there's not enough coming to the state. Make a conscious decision to go, okay, well, I've got a crop here which could go 6 tonne without frost, but with frost, and 4 out of 5 years it gets frosted and only goes 3 tonne, I'm probably not going to put nitrogen on that paddock. I've got this paddock up here, might only go 4 tonne per hectare with the extra nitrogen, but it never gets frosted, so I'm going to put my nitrogen up there and just make those strategic decisions in those years when you can. So back to that analogy, you can performance enhance these cars, but the reality is barley and the oats are still a lot more stronger in terms of frost. There are some other tools. So these are the GRDC frost tips and tactics. So this is really good to use at this time of year to go through your seeding program or your trial program. No, it's not your trial program, your cropping program, and review like what you're currently doing and try and actually come up with a plan for what you're going to do for frost if it's important enough. There's some frost FAQs and frost ID guides for cereals and canola. Hopefully you don't need those later on in the year. I'd really like to thank GRDC and the National Frost Initiative who funded some of the work, as well as the collaborators in Western Australia and Liggins Farm, Facey Group, Consult Ag, and the guys over east that we've worked with. A lot of this is all written up, so if you guys want to have a look through and actually see all the details and all the economics and all the assumptions behind them, it's all pretty much written up there. Thank you.
Questions for Ben? Ben, what's the next raft of research in frost? What's the next big thing coming through?
Good question. So we're currently working with GRDC on scoping out the new frost kits going forward. So that will happen through the next 6 months. At the moment, I've got 6 years worth of trial data that I've got to still get through, write up, finish interpreting and publish. So that's my focus for the next 12 months. We are still doing some other work, some small projects on frost. So one of those is looking at trying to understand how that rain in front of the frost events increases the frost damage. So we're looking at the ice nucleating activity of the rainfall and of the canopy, and it's kind of a bit of a spin-off from the stubble work we've done originally, where we're still trying to understand the mechanism by which stubble management reduces frost severity and duration. And so we're looking at ice nucleating activity and how that's impacting on it.
Would you differentiate between head and stem frost?
It depends on, sorry, can you clarify what you mean stem frost? Stem frost after head emergence or stem frost during stem elongation?
That stem frost after head development.
Yeah, it's never as devastating.
When the whole crop starts.
Yeah. In terms of, so we had that in our 2016 trials at Pingerup and at Coolin, and also, yeah, we see that quite a lot. I guess my question is, do I differentiate between head and stem, or do I think that the same responses occur with this data? Yeah, so...
We've had years when no crop at all on any paddock.
Yeah.
Barley in particular.
Yep.
That's just bad luck, isn't it?
Well, no, I suggest you maybe, I mean, you need to think about why you're actually trying to grow barley there in that part of the landscape when there are other crops or other enterprises that aren't as susceptible to frost in that part of the landscape. So it may be that, you know, that paddock, I'm never really going to be able to grow barley longer term in that paddock. I need to swap the enterprise in that paddock to get the most value out of that part of the landscape. So it might be that you have to go to hay is obviously the obvious option in terms of if you've got parts or locations where you just get wiped out year in, year out. The occasional one, so like, you know, the 1 in 10 year event that you know where you're going to get frosted everywhere, the only thing that's going to help you with that is good business sense and good equity in your business. Yep. Pardon? Sheep? Yep. They're pretty frost tolerant. I haven't seen one die of frost yet.
Thanks very much. Ben?